Have you ever had a creepy, trippy dream like the one Damon had in this episode? I can't wait to talk about this scene. A diverse smorgasbord of events takes place in House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 3, not to mention the controversial takes that I've seen on it, but I've got lots to say on the matter, so let's get into it. But first, if you like what I'm doing here, give this video a like and subscribe if you're new. Also, check out the description for links to my other channels, my socials, and my Twitch live streams. We got an update in the opening sequence! In my previous review, I expressed my disappointment that the tapestry in the show's intro hadn't been updated from episode to episode with the new events. Looks like I jumped the gun a little bit, because that has now changed with episode 3. We now have Aegon and Helena's son Jaehaerys as he was during the funeral procession, and the rat catchers that Aegon hanged. Both images, like the rest of the tapestry, are surrounded by blood, signifying the atrocities that marred the Targaryen dynasty, a stain woven into the very fabric of the realm's history. We start off in the Riverlands in either Bracken or Blackwood territory, depending on who you ask, it would seem. Some young members of House Bracken are talking. One of them, Aaron Bracken, makes a joke about killing Blackwoods, and like clockwork, he's accosted by a Blackwood. As it is later discussed in this episode, these neighboring houses have a rivalry that goes back so far no one even knows what started it. They just keep feuding, which causes more feuds, and the conflict continues to be passed down from generation to generation. House Targaryen seems like they could be heading in a similar direction, so it wouldn't be a bad idea for them to view the Bracken-Blackwood feud as an example of what not to do. We've actually seen some of the hatred between members of the Brackens and Blackwoods in Season 1 of House of the Dragon. Rhaenyra witnessed a fight break out right before her that ended as quickly as it began. And their feud was also discussed during a small council meeting later in the season. So anyway, a common issue that these two Riverlands houses fight over is territorial disputes. The Blackwoods confront the Brackens about rearranging territorial lines designated by the placement of stones, but it escalates really fast into a fight about the monarch that their houses declared for. The Blackwoods declared for Rhaenyra, and the Brackens declared for Aegon. What started this fight didn't even have anything to do with the Targaryens. They just like any excuse to take their issues with each other further. Just look at the hatred here. Eventually, a battle ensues that goes down in Westerosi history as the Battle of the Burning Mill, and ends with the spilt blood of many young men on both sides. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra has both the Cargyle twins buried side by side. Jace doesn't like that Rhaenyra's would-be assassin is buried next to the man who defended her, but she reasonably explains that it's not his fault. He was doing what he was told. And in a rather frustrated tone, Jace asks her, okay, sure, but what about the ones who sent him to kill you? This is the first, but not the last time this episode where we see Jace's frustration with Rhaenyra's aversion to violence. Jace is angry and wants to answer the Green's attack. But as we soon see, that's not how Rhaenyra wants to do things just yet. Rhaenyra is in a difficult position. She wants to take the throne she was promised and feels like she's been wronged, but she doesn't want to take it by force if that means violence and death will be the end result. She partly wants to show mercy out of the kindness of her heart, but she also wants to keep the promise she made to Viserys of keeping the realm united to protect against the dark coming from the north, the whole Song of Ice and Fire prophecy. But as we've seen in previous examples, and as continues throughout the rest of this episode, she's being pressured by her family and her counselors to use violent means of getting revenge and getting her throne. Just then, Rhaenys joins Rhaenyra and talks about exactly that. The path to the throne will be one paved in blood. The younger generations want war and revenge, and whatever started all of this is just going to become more and more murky with each new atrocity. But there's still a possibility for peace to prevail. Alicent Hightower. Rhaenys knows, especially after their discussion last season, that Alicent would prefer the conflict coming to an end as peacefully as possible, so if Rhaenyra can find anyone with power and influence to reason with on the opposing side, Alicent is the one. But does Alicent have power and influence enough anymore to make that difference Rhaenys is advocating for? Well, we'll talk about that shortly. Then Rhaenyra reveals that Alicent sent her a message via Raven, but she's been keeping her on red. Rhaenyra thinks Alicent permitted Eric's assassination attempt, but to that, Rhaenys starts talking more sense and points out the same way that you permitted Jaehaerys' murder. And Rhaenyra knows this deep down, but the incident is still very fresh, so she's having a hard time coming to terms with those smaller details at the moment. Kristen is seen alone looking contemplative and anxious. But when he's shown later throughout the episode, he looks collected and confident around others. Kristen made a lot of bad decisions and now holds one of the most powerful positions in the realm. As someone with a history of addressing conflict with impulsive violence, this new role he has that requires the use of diplomacy is stacking up the pressure. But he does a good job, at least, of masking his anxiety and self-doubt in front of others. He's also got his Hand of the King chain around his neck. Can't really rock the pin when you're regularly in armor. As he makes his way down the Red Keep main drag, he sees Aegon's bros, Martin Rain and Red Ned Waters, just hanging out in their new Kingsguard armor. We just met these guys this season, but we've already gotten a pretty good idea about what kind of people they are. Similarly to Aegon, they just want to do whatever they want and have a good time. They're not the type to take responsibility seriously. They don't even seem concerned that their Lord Commander is walking up until he pauses and gives them a stern look, and that's when they get up and stand how they're meant to stand. Kristen continues on into the small council chambers, and we see Aegon's other bro, Leon Estermont, also has been made a Kingsguard. And he's just leaning on a wall. Doesn't correct himself when his Lord Commander sees him like that. If anyone tries killing Aegon, good luck, buddy. The council discusses the Battle of the Burning Mill, which Aegon wants to see as a victory for their side, since Samwell Blackwood, the lord of the side who declared for Rhaenyra, died in the battle. But Tylan points out that since there were heavy losses on both sides, it's hardly a victory, and Ironrod says that since the Blackwoods and Brackens will use any excuse to spill one another's blood, our involvement in it is meaningless. Aegon doesn't like this answer and wants to think of it as war and asks for a way to address it. Then everyone looks to the Hand of the King for an answer. Unsurprisingly, Cole can't provide one. He just sits there. He doesn't even look like he's searching for an answer. Grandmaster Orwyle suggests seeking the support of Grover Tully, since House Tully are the lords paramount of the Trident, and the Blackwood Bracken houses fall within his domain. Since Grover Tully has, again, been talked about as incompetent, to say the least, others of the council don't think that this is a good idea. But Ironrod reminds Aegon that Ormond Hightower is leading a large host to King's Landing from Oldtown, so they should swing by the appropriate places in the Riverlands on the way to suppress them. We also get a second mention of Daeron this time. We even hear mention of his dragon and how she's near fighting age. Now that we're allowed to discuss it, Daeron's dragon is called Tessarion, and she's also known as the Blue Queen. In Fire and Blood, she's the color blue and breathes a cobalt blue fire, which sounds so cool, and I really hope that we get to meet her. Back to the council, Tylan says that the Hightower host is far away, but reminds everyone that Jason's army would be able to get to the Riverlands quicker and harass the Blackwoods. Then we really start seeing the disarray in the council. Tylan just shut down Ironrod's proposal with his own. Now Orwyle objects to Tylan's solution, which causes Tylan to argue with Orwyle until Alicent steps in and gives everyone a good scolding about their lack of discipline. She's not wrong. Now Criston steps up and puts his decision forward. Notice I said decision and not proposal. He's decided on what they're going to do, and it's not up for discussion. Any small objections that come his way are shot right down. And sure, he is the hand, but it may be worth hearing out others' concerns, at least a little. His plan is to gather an army here in the Crownlands. Any of those houses who declared for Rhaenyra will be brought to their side, and he'll take this host to the Riverlands where the Brackens can add to their numbers so they can subdue the rest of the Riverlands and take Harrenhal. In this moment, they are unaware that Daemon is on his way to Harrenhal, but since he arrives shortly after, they'll probably learn soon enough, so we'll have to see how Criston would like to proceed after learning that Daemon's already taken the castle. But Daemon's only defense is a dragon. A very good defense, don't get me wrong. But if Daemon means to head out to gather the rest of the Riverlands houses, Harrenhal will be left open to the Greens depending on their time of arrival, so it should be interesting to see how that all works out. Also, Aemon is playing with a coin. That's 3 episodes in a row now where we see him doing stuff with coins. It's also worth noting how quickly Alicent's concerns and arguments are dismissed here. She's not totally on board with Criston's plan, but he goes right over her head and asks Aegon, who, of course, is so down. He's wanted to make these kinds of moves for a while now. The only exceptions he makes are bringing he and Aemon's dragons. Criston wants Vhagar to stay put to defend King's Landing, and no one wants Aegon running out and putting himself in danger considering the role he represents. Aegon doesn't like the possible implications behind their caution, so we get this line.
I'm as as fearsome as any of them.
He's got a lot of insecurities and wants to prove himself, especially when he's got a brother like Aemond. He's contained later in the episode, but I don't think we should expect to see him contained forever. Mysaria almost left Dragonstone last episode, but she got held up, saving Rhaenyra's life. She's first shown here looking out at a very restless sea smoke flying above the sea. Rhaenyra approaches her, and Mysaria tells her that as a reward for saving her life, she'd like a place at her court. The last 2 episodes, Mysaria was trying to flee and wanted to give up everything she learned over the years in King's Landing, but now that she's seen Rhaenyra's merciful side, she'd like to continue using all that she knows of the workings of the Red Keep to Rhaenyra's benefit. Plus, like has been previously shown, Mysaria, as a commoner herself, cares about other commoners, and she sees now that Rhaenyra will likely be better for them than Aegon. Mysaria is wondering what the heck could be going on with Sea Smoke since he seems to be so restless, but even Rhaenyra, a Targaryen dragon rider, doesn't know what's up with him. I love this moment when Mysaria suggests that he could be lonely and Rhaenyra looks taken aback at this thought. Could this mean that Laenor has died and his dragon can sense that even from really far away? The strong psychological connection between dragon and rider has been pretty well established at this point, so that's definitely a possibility. Or could he maybe just be missing his rider? There's no definitive answers here, so we're just gonna have to wait and see if we do get an answer in an upcoming episode. Rhaenyra gives Rhaena the duty of escorting her children to the Vale. We learned from Jace in episode 1 that Jane Eyre will provide support to their side as long as she's given a dragon to protect her house from the opposition. So Rhaenyra is doing so with Tyraxes, Joffrey's dragon, a little itty-bitty baby dragon who isn't yet big enough to ride. An actor has been cast to play Jane this season, so I'm wondering if we're gonna see her have a really disappointed reaction to Rhaenyra sending her a baby dragon. From the Vale, Rhaena is to take Rhaenyra's 2 youngest sons, Aegon and Viserys, to Pentos if Prince Reggio will have them. Things are heating up in this war, and after Rhaenyra was almost killed by an assassin, she doesn't want to keep her youngest children around, possibly putting them in harm's way. Rhaena is very unhappy with Rhaenyra's orders. We saw when she was younger how bummed it made her to be without a dragon, and these orders were given to her specifically because without a dragon, she's not able to offer value in the way she'd like to, how her twin Baela does. I feel bad for her. That would suck. But I also understand it from Rhaenyra's point of view. Daemon arrives at Harrenhal and successfully takes the castle. He's been talking about doing this since the end of season 1, so it's cool to see that he's finally done it. Speaking of cool, I absolutely loved the sequences that played out here this episode. Harrenhal is reputedly haunted by Black Heron and his sons, and possibly by others who've perished here. We saw Harrenhal in Game of Thrones, but it wasn't really presented in the creepy, spooky manner in which it was here. So to start out the sequence, Daemon lands Caraxes on one of the castle's towers during a stormy night, and this looked amazing, and the sound effects and music that went along with the fantastic visuals could not have been better in my opinion. Then Daemon starts making his way through the castle with Dark Sister at the ready. He's quite obviously looking for a fight. He's got a lot of pent-up anger after his unresolved argument with Rhaenyra, and he actually managed to refrain from choking her this time, so we can only imagine how bad the violent urges must be for a guy like him at the moment. They did an amazing job of creating a creepy atmosphere. As he's making his way around Harrenhal, the castle's dark, there's thunder, swarms of bats, strange echoes, and at one point it sounds like a woman's voice saying, "Daemon."
Daemon?
A crossbowman gets in his way, so he knocks him out and busts into an occupied room to find the castellan, Simon Strong, uncle to Lionel Strong. Simon gladly yields the castle to Daemon and invites him to dinner, to which Daemon thinks is poisoned, but Simon is not interested in killing him or working in support of his great-nephew Larys, an agent of the Greens. Last season, we saw Larys have his father and brother murdered here. Considering the unlikelihood of an accidental fire, Simon believes Larys was behind it and therefore rejects him as his lord. I noticed there's been some confusion about this piece of dialogue. Simon refers to Daemon as "my prince," and Daemon corrects him with "Your Grace." Some have said that it's treason for Daemon to have others call him "Your Grace," since it may be Daemon claiming the role of king, not king consort, which he is considered by those who accept Rhaenyra's claim. This has been referenced in previous episodes. Others have said it makes sense for him to be called "Your Grace," as the wives of kings like Allison, for example, are referred to as Your Grace. Perhaps what's going on here is that Westeros has never had a king consort since it's never had a queen regnant, so the obscurity of Daemon's title has the lords unsure of what he should be called. Daemon is quite sure, though, that he wishes to be referred to as Your Grace, and I think the main point is that king or king consort, he wants others to see him as an authority at the same level as his wife, which in that case would be at least a little treasonous.
Small treason.
We get a better look and a proper introduction to Alicent's brother, Gawain Hightower. Kristen also gets a proper introduction this time, and Gawain is kind of rude. He's resentful that his father Otto lost his position to Kristen. Now I know Kristen is a huge a-hole, but Gawain doesn't know that, and he's rude anyway, so we get an idea of what he's like pretty quickly. Alicent and Kristen have a formal farewell until Kristen asks for her favor, and she bestows this upon him in the form of a titty hanky. Kristen's host sets out, and they are officially on the march. Not before we get a nasty shot of some rotting cheese, but I'm not going to show that here. But I will say it's interesting to see the rotting bodies creating a feast for crows. I had to do it. It's interesting to see the rotting bodies creating a feast for the crows as soldiers are heading out to war. After the assassination attempt and the Battle of the Burning Mill, Rhaenyra's counselors have gotten incredibly restless. Some have been urging her to take action for a while now, but with the recent events, they've become so impatient that they suggest she hides herself away somewhere safe while they wage her war for her. This doesn't sit well with her, and they get a stern talking to from both Rhaenyra and Rhaenys. There's more frustration and disappointment written on Jace's faces in this scene when Rhaenyra doesn't heed the counselor's pleas for aggression. We get another scene with Corlys and Rhaenys. Rhaenys brings Corlys a little picnic in the shipyard. Oh, so cute. And they discuss their grandchildren. Since Luke's death, the new heir to Driftmark is Rhaenyra's next eldest son, Joffrey. Rhaenys offers the possibility of making Rhaena Corlys' heir instead. Before Baela was betrothed to Jace, Rhaenys made the same proposal to Corlys about Baela. He wasn't down then, and he doesn't seem to be down now. Last time it was because he wanted his seat to pass to his son's children, but since Rhaenyra's 3 oldest boys are obviously not Valyrians, Rhaenys didn't like the idea of them inheriting the Driftwood throne. Now, Corlys doesn't like the idea of Rhaena being his heir because of her lack of sea and ship knowledge. Rhaena or Joffrey, he suggests they can get it figured out over time, but Rhaenys stresses to him that shit's getting real right now. There's a war getting started and you could die soon. Unfortunately, Corlys shows no interest in discussing it and ends the conversation. And it was kind of sad to see. Rhaenys is worried about losing any more members of her family. Anyone has a right to feel this way, especially given the current circumstances, but even more so for a person who has lost both of their children. Rhaenyra sees off Rhaena and her 3 youngest sons. We don't get to see Joffrey's dragon Tyraxes or Aegon's dragon Stormcloud, but we hear them and we see their little travel crates. I would have loved to see some cute little baby dragons again, but I don't know, maybe they'll give us a glimpse later. Rhaena and Baela say goodbye, and Rhaena expresses her disappointment with her task, but her sister tells her, hey, we gotta do what we gotta do with the cards we've been dealt. Then Rhaenyra shows Rhaena dragon eggs that she's sending with her. These are the ones from Syrax shown at the end of last season. And it has been confirmed by this episode's director that these eggs are the same ones Daenerys receives and later hatch into her dragons in Game of Thrones. Rhaenyra wants them protected and kept separate from the rest of the dragons in case anything should happen to her or her dragons during the war. Alicent and Helaena have a conversation about Jaehaerys' death and their grief. Helena's general outlook has never aligned with that of the typical highborn lord or lady, and she considers how her grief is useless and how the small folk who witnessed last episode's funeral procession may think poorly of her for making a big show of her son's death, since they lose their children way more often. I discussed in the previous episode review how Helaena has never cared about having a role among the nobility, and it's become apparent here how this disinterest has led her to consider the feelings of the small folk better than she may have otherwise. Alicent expresses that she's been sad and concerned about what Helena's been through. Helaena answers this with a simple, I forgive you. Such a simple moment, but the scene almost made me cry. This girl who was just born into this life was essentially forced by Alicent to marry her brother, someone who doesn't show her care or attention, unless he's drunk, like she noted last season. And she had to give birth to his children, and because of the political situation that she had no part in creating, one of those children is slaughtered in front of her, while her mother is in bed with the guy in charge of the royal family sworn protectors. For her to offer Alicent her forgiveness was quite an emotional moment. Aegon is trying on Aegon the Conqueror's Valyrian steel armor while surrounded by his yes-men Kingsguard buddies. He intends to fly into war on his dragon, so he wants to do it wearing the Conqueror's armor to match the Conqueror's crown and name he already possesses. Larys enters to manipulate Aegon into not flying his dragon to war. It seems so obvious what Larys is doing here. Maybe that's because we've seen him in numerous contexts doing similar things, but there's been times where I'm surprised that the characters he's manipulating can't see right through what he's doing. Maybe it's because the subject he broaches with them gets them so preoccupied that they become incapable of considering Larys' intentions or motivations. Either way, Aegon gets manipulated by Larys into changing his plans of flying to meet Kristen and decides to stay put. We should probably take note of how easy it is for Larys to manipulate Aegon. In episode 1, he planted seeds about canning Otto as Hand, and shortly after, Aegon fired Otto. Now, he just successfully manipulated him again. Aegon approves of Larys' spy capabilities, so he gives him the official Master of Whispers role. Since Aegon's now not leaving King's Landing, his friends invite him to join them on their night out on the town where they want to take a squire to lose his V-card. Aegon's like, well, hold on. You know you're sworn to chastity, right? And they have clearly never even considered upholding those vows. Ay, ay, ay. What a prime example of why you shouldn't practice nepotism. I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but what do you think the odds are that if Aegon's life is threatened on their watch, he's not going to end up dead? Out in the streets of King's Landing, we meet Ulf. As he enters the tavern, this is giving serious vibes.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name.
He joins his friends at a table, including a new Dornish friend who he informs of his parentage. Ulf claims to be the bastard son of Balon the Brave, making him the half-brother of Viserys and Daemon. Since paternity tests aren't a thing here and Balon's long dead anyway, who knows if this is true? Balon loved his wife Alyssa, but she died young, so it's possible, not likely, but possible he had other affairs that led to unplanned pregnancy. Doesn't matter because we'll never know for sure. As he's talking about his nephew, Jacaerys, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, in walks his other nephew, Aegon. His reaction was so funny. He was shaking in his boots that Aegon might have heard the treason he was just practically shouting. Lucky for him, that wasn't the case, and Aegon locks in relationship points with some of the small folk, something he's been in need of after hanging the rat catchers. Also, it was wild seeing Diana here. Wild and depressing. She was canned from her serving job in the Red Keep after getting assaulted by Aegon, so her new job is definitely not glamorous, and it's at a place where we see her get groped, which I would imagine happens often here. It also made my skin crawl a little when she was shown serving Aegon. You know, she hasn't forgotten him or what he did to her, but he definitely doesn't remember who she is. Hell, he couldn't even remember her name the next day. We transition from Ulf's night of fun to Aegon's night of fun that leads him and the boys to a brothel. I think you'll understand the few changes to the visuals as we talk about this scene. In his inebriated state, Aegon is now happy to assist the young squire in losing that V-card. He uses the same cute little phrase he used when he brought Aemond here. You know the one. As he's pulling back the curtains, ruining everyone's privacy, the final curtain reveals Aemond back for another night with Sylvie. Aegon thinks Aemond's return to her is the funniest thing, and he proceeds to mock his brother while his friends actually don't join in. Even these yes men don't want to get on the bad side of someone with a reputation like Aemond. Even though the one-eyed prince finds some sense of comfort here with Sylvie, he wants his reputation upheld, so he walks out, dismissing Sylvie as just another whore. Remember last episode when he told her about how they used to make fun of him when he was younger? Clearly, he hasn't let that go, so getting made fun of here, even by Aegon, has gotta be messing with him pretty bad. I look forward to seeing Aegon and Aemond's next interaction. Although Aegon might not remember it, and Aemond will probably act like it never even happened. In the next scene, Rhaenyra is sadly holding her son's toy. She's dealing with the inner conflict of being a good queen or a good mother, since at this time it's not really possible for her to do both. She takes out the letter Alicent sent that still remains unopened and finally decides to read it. We don't get a good look at exactly what was said, but it's enough to persuade her to act. But before she does, Kristen tries to stop Gawain from abandoning the host to find an inn when they get a sight of Bela on Moondancer. Moondancer looks pretty cool. Bela spots them before they can get to the trees and begins a pursuit. They get to the trees, but not before Bela got a good enough look to recognize Kristen. I like how they built the tension here as the knights were awaiting the possibility of getting roasted by a dragon. Bela has returned from her reconnaissance mission and reports to Rhaenyra and her council that she spotted Cole. Bela confirms that she was close enough to be sure, which Rhaenyra isn't pleased about since she specifically ordered her to keep a distance. The news about the Greens heading toward Crownland's keeps to expand their army has got the councilors even more shook and impatient than they've ever been, and they urge Rhaenyra to take action. Simon Staunton, the Lord of Rook's Rest, is more concerned with fortifying his lands as the Greens are approaching with an army. Rhaenyra wants to give peace one more try before acting, so she gives them the old, "I appreciate your suggestions, and I will take them into consideration." We get another Jace face in this scene, but this time he's looking more pleadingly than impatient. This scene, in addition to the previous one, are exciting. Tensions are building, and you can just sense that big things are on the horizon. Back at Harrenhal, Daemon has his crazy dream, or hallucinations. I was so shocked to see Rhaenyra's previous actor return for this twisted scene. Daemon looks at her and dead Jaehaerys with tears in his eyes. He seems to be feeling a regret for his treatment of Rhaenyra when she was younger, and for the death of Jaehaerys that was caused by him. Also, think about how she said, "Always coming and going, and I have to clean up afterwards." He did this back when she looked like that, and he just did it again last episode. We've never seen Daemon looking remorseful like this before, so maybe Harrenhal is bringing this side out of him? But then suddenly, he's in the Harrenhal Godswood, standing right in front of the weirwood tree, and Alice Rivers is watching him, and then utters the only line she has the whole episode.
"You will die in this place."
I'd like to talk more about her, but let's wait and see what else she does in the show first. Why did Daemon have these eerie visions? Could this be the ghosts tormenting him? Did Alice Rivers have something to do with it? Since he was standing right in front of a weirwood tree and the Isle of Faces inhabited by a bunch of heart trees and the Green Men is nearby, could this have something to do with the old gods and their magic? Or is he simply in a weird place in his life and his subconscious is forcing him to think back to his past mistakes and his impending death? We don't have that answer, but it's pretty cool stuff either way. Rhaenyra seeks out Mysaria's knowledge of the Red Keep. She wants to go for that one last attempt at peace and decides the best way to do it is by having a face-to-face meeting with Alicent. Per Mysaria's guidance, Rhaenyra sneaks into King's Landing on a fishing boat with her Queen's Guard, Steffan Darklyn, the two of them in disguise. Rhaenyra is disguised as a septa, which works out since people tend to not pay attention to septas. The headpiece hides her Targaryen hair, and it looks perfectly normal for a septa to be in a sept, the location outside the Red Keep, where Alicent can be found without guards right on top of her. Now that Rhaenyra has accomplished the meeting, she tries to discuss how her side and Alicent's side can move forward without a bloody war ensuing. When Alicent is resistant to listening to Rhaenyra's pleas, Rhaenyra accuses her of stealing her birthright that Viserys upheld. This is when Alicent brings up the miscommunication between her and Viserys when he was on his deathbed. The miscommunication that led to her participation in usurping the throne. And if we're being real, the throne was going to be usurped with or without Alicent's participation, but it's not really important because the only thing that stopped her from feeling guilty about deciding to participate was the belief that Viserys changed his mind and wanted her son Aegon to take his place. Which is why seeing her find out that she misunderstood Viserys when she thought he was talking about her son, but instead was talking about Aegon the Conqueror and his dream, is priceless. Rhaenyra's pleas don't matter. Like Alicent tells Rhaenyra, it's too late. Blood has been spilled, their army is marching, Otto's dismissed, Aegon, Aemon, and the rest of the council want war, and everyone is done listening to Alicent. Any power she may have had to find a peaceful solution is gone. Now that Rhaenyra knows the only possibility she had at moving forward without using aggression is lost, we should expect to see her take a different approach to everything in the next episode. I bet Jace and her counselors will be pleased to hear it. Now, I know there's been a lot of criticisms about this episode, and this last scene in particular, so I'm going to throw my thoughts in about them. As far as Rhaenyra deciding to sneak into King's Landing and doing so successfully, it's a tad unbelievable. It's certainly possible, though, when properly employing a well thought out strategy. It would have been more ridiculous if they had her sneaking in and out of the Red Keep to ambush Alicent. But to be honest, we probably wouldn't have been worse off without this scene. Though getting to see an interaction between these two again was nice, especially with the result of their conversation. Alicent learning that she misinterpreted Viserys' words when he was on his deathbed was really satisfying, and I bet it has an impact on how she views and treats the conflict moving forward. And maybe it will be relevant to other future plot points. So I think that even though you do have to stretch your imagination just a little bit to allow the scene to work in your head, it may have a nice payoff. Also, I've seen a lot of people complaining about the pacing of season 2. Remember, this world is huge. There's tons of characters, places, and lore, and they're barely scraping the surface. But there's some stuff that just has to be established for the upcoming big moments to be understandable and feel satisfying, especially for those who haven't read Fire and Blood. But who knows, maybe by the end of the season that won't be the case, but I'm optimistic. This episode does a great job illustrating the persistent cycle of violence and the devastating consequences of abandoning the pursuit of peace. The Bracken-Blackwood battle serves as a stark reminder of the senseless destruction that you get from prolonged conflict. Rhaenyra's struggle to maintain her commitment to peace in the face of growing pressure for retaliation highlights the difficulties of avoiding violence, even with the best intentions. As Alicent communicates, the window for a peaceful resolution has shut, and this grim realization sets the stage for a terrible war filled with inevitable violence and bloodshed. With war closer now than ever, we better strap in and get ready for some classic Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, jaw-dropping moments throughout the rest of the season. Let me know what you thought about the episode and what you're looking forward to seeing in the next 6 episodes. Don't forget to subscribe for more and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you to talk about episode 4.